how did the early Irish law deal with mental illnesses? The ancient Irish judges, who we call Brehons, recorded a great amount of legal information in their manuscripts. But even still, because of the pretty brutal colonization of Ireland by Britain, a lot of this information has been lost over the years. Still, what we have, when we piece it together, gives us a very interesting sort of keyhole glimpse into early Irish life. In fact, in my opinion, the Brehon laws, give us the best keyhole glimpse into early Irish life. Not just how society was ordered, but when we look at the laws of a people, we're also looking at the aspirations of those people. We're looking at what sort of behaviors matter to them, and what they matter to them so much that they were prepared to codify these behaviors somehow and make them norms and customary practices. It should be said that the Brehon Law was not created by the judges. It developed through customary practice. So if you can imagine over time, when a group of people are engaging in business in a certain way, it becomes a customary way of engaging in that business. And custom eventually becomes practice, and it becomes a norm. It then is expected that the custom should happen in that way. Well, the role of the Brehon was to know and understand about these customs and how they evolved and how they were shaped, and really just to articulate those customs in a way that sought to find a resolution, to start to find harmony whenever there was a circumstance where a mishap happened or a calamity of life. Even though a lot has been lost, what we have still gives us a pretty good picture. And it's fascinating to see just how detailed some of these manuscripts are. I mean, I found it interesting that they have laws and manuscripts talking about beekeeping and how to be a good neighbor legally. So it's also interesting to find that the early Irish law tracts addressed and dealt with people with mental illnesses. It might come as a surprise to some people to learn that the Irish were thinking about things like the prevention of exploitation for individuals who suffered disabilities and mental illnesses. But what I said a moment ago, that like the laws actually reflect an intention of the people. They reflect somehow an aspiration of the people. So we can kind of assume that these laws came about because the people within society felt a need to have extra protections for people who suffer from mental health issues. I'd like to share a little bit about those laws with you now. And before I do, the resources that I'm using for this are mostly Fergus Kelly's book, Early Irish Law, and his article, Medicine and Early Irish Law. And Dr. Fergus Kelly is one of the foremost authorities on early Irish law. So if you're interested in doing some more deeper research yourself, I would really recommend that his books are the ones that you should go for. There are a lot of books out there on early Irish law and Brehon law. The older ones tend to be quite romantic and fluffy, but Dr. Fergus Kelly's work is quite rigid and academic. So if you're interested in doing deeper research, I would say to start there. When we are considering the Brehon laws, when we're talking about the Brehon laws, we have to really try and put ourselves into the past, into the context of the times that these laws were in place, and be careful not to judge them with modern lenses. We have to also understand that in order for something to become a written law, it must have originated from like an initial desire, an initial intention to improve society. And over time, this became a practice, a customary practice, eventually would become widely used. And then eventually it would be considered a law, and it would find its way into the law texts of the Brehons. What we can assume about the early Irish, therefore, is that these customary approaches, they must have arisen from a desire to protect the weaker in society, to have a leniency, a clemency, and empathy for individuals who suffered with mental impairments, mental disabilities. This was even formulated through the legal principle that the rights of the insane precede all other rights. And fines were levied on anyone who would even mock those with mental or physical disabilities. The principle here was that Such individuals should not be exploited, and exploitation was therefore outlawed in the Brehon Law. What sort of a mindset, what sort of a society develops laws and customs like this? So many hundreds of years ago, individuals with mental disabilities were considered to be legally incapable. And so in this way, they were not viewed any differently than, say, a woman who had no legal standing, a child, an older son who was still dependent on his father, or even for that matter, a slave or a hostage. Essentially, a person with unsound mind had no legal status, no legal standing. And they were legally dependent on their closest guardian. So in all matters for law, in their obligations, in their obligation to protect them, it fell to their closest legal guardians, which was their immediate family, but also their wider kin group by extension. Much like we do today, the early Irish were kind of advanced in their thinking enough to see a difference between different types of mental illness. Fergus Kelly lists 3 of these in his book. I'm going to mention them now. You have a drew, a mur, and a dosach. He gives the translations as follows. A drew is somebody who is mentally retarded. A mur is somebody who is deranged. And a dosach is somebody who is violently insane. I want to go a little bit deeper into these words so we can have a clear understanding of what was meant. The word drew, which Fergus Kelly describes as someone who is mentally retarded, is still found in modern Irish today. And if you look it up, it will tell you it means an irresponsible person, an imbecile, a jester, or a buffoon. In other modern usages, it can mean someone who is unchaste, and it can mean someone who is wanton, which means merciless. Kelly gives the translation of the word mur to mean someone who is deranged. In modern Irish, we have the word miaru, which means derangement, distraction, bewilderment, confusion, mental aberration, wandering, hallucination, or mirage. Kelly gives the translation of the word dosach to mean someone who is violently insane. And this word is also found in Irish today and is taken to mean daring, madness, fury, audacious, furious. The law texts also sometimes include the word escán within these categories, meaning someone whose sense has departed from them. The commenters take this to mean someone who is senile or has dementia. These are also classed as someone who is not legally capable on account of their mental condition. In the text, this condition is described as somebody who is old or invalid because, quote, his memory does not reach far. Any contracts entered into with persons of unsound mind would be de facto, prima facie, automatically invalid. In addition to voiding a contract, any persons who would entice a drew into such a contract would be liable of paying an additional fine. Any person who incited a drew to commit a crime would be liable themselves for any penalties arising from that crime. The person of unsound mind, however, was also exempt from giving evidence in court. Their testimony had no legal standing. Their legal rights, their legal identity rested entirely with their legal guardian, who would speak for them at court and be liable for their offences. In such small communities, tightly knit families, the family and the tribe had a responsibility to their kin who happened to suffer from a mental illness. But they also had a duty to protect themselves and others from the dangerously insane. I'm asking you to remember the context of the times where this was taking place before I say what I'm about to say, because it's not nice to think about. But in order to protect themselves from the dangerously insane, when they didn't have prisons, they didn't have hospitals, they didn't have ways to really take care of people who had these mental illnesses. A dásachtoch, someone who was violently insane, could be tied up and forcibly detained. That's if they posed a threat to themselves or others. And we say this is unthinkable by today's standards, but we just have institutions for this now. And it's important to try to appreciate how this was done out of their form of compassion, their ignorance, their lack of an alternative. Interestingly, if either partner in a marriage happened to become insane throughout the marriage, the other partner was entitled to separation. The law also had added protections for people of unsound mind in criminal cases. So a man who impregnates a mentally unsound woman, whether by rape or by persuasion or mischief, would find himself fully liable for the financial and social responsibility for raising any offspring. A quote from Kelly's Early Irish Law in the introduction. He says, "The maternal kin has no responsibility for the child of an insane woman, a slave woman, or sick woman, or for a child begotten against the wishes of the man's father or by rape. Such children were reared solely by the paternal kin." A man who impregnates a mer is solely responsible for rearing the offspring. And a sane woman who bears a child to a du is similarly obliged to rear it unaided. In other cases, the law gives leniency to the actions of a Drew where others would normally exact penalties. If one is hit by stones being thrown by a Drew while passing by, the burden shifts from the Drew to the passerby, who, among these two parties, is deemed to have had the greater responsibility to get out of the way of the flying objects. So we can see here that the law had a leniency and a sort of an understanding of that people who suffered from mental illnesses may not be fully accountable for their actions. In a similar fashion to this, the legal guardians of a mer were not held responsible for any offences that they committed while they were in an alehouse. So there was a bit of leniency and clemency given to these people. I'd like to finish with one more quote from Fergus Kelly, page 154. "An offence committed by an insane person is normally paid for by his or her guardian, or by the person who incited the crime. But in some circumstances, such offences are not actionable. For example, an injury caused by a missile thrown by a du is regarded as accidental and does not require compensation." So I hope you've enjoyed this very brief glimpse into a very small aspect of the Brehon Law and early Irish society, and to show you a little bit how intricate these were and how much of life they took account of. And in some ways, perhaps there are lessons that can be learned from their approaches, from their empathy today. I hope you've enjoyed this little presentation. There is an article covering this same topic on our website, and you can check out on our Facebook page as well. Thanks for tuning in. Please subscribe to the channel, hit like, all of that wonderful stuff, and we'll see you in the next video. Slán go fóill.